Yo, what up guys? Today we are reviewing the brand new AirPod Pros. I'm going to give you my first impressions because I got them first behind the scenes. Except for, no we're not, these are the exact same AirPods that everybody's had for the last year. Apple is the Donald Trump of technology with the amount of free advertising they receive by media companies and, quote, journalism outlets. Why do they do it? Why do news companies cover tech review things like this? Because it gets views. Same reason they put Donald Trump up there for hours and hours and hours during the 2016 election. Media is just as culpable. But no, I don't want to talk about AirPods. I couldn't care less. The new AirPods are like the old AirPods. They're headphones. Instead, I want to talk about this Washington Post op-ed where the author, prior journalist, and lover of Oliver Wendell Holmes, declares America needs a hate speech law. Washington Post is a big company. There's sort of many different ideas, but occasionally they just have one so terrible that I can't help but point out its stupidity. So this article reads, Why America Needs a Hate Speech Law. And it starts by Richard Engel, a former editor of Time, is the author of Information Wars. Nice little plug there for your book, very good. And was the State Department's Undersecretary for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs from 2013 to 2016. So Richard starts his great philosophical treatise here, just like John Locke and Thomas Hobbes and Jonathan Rawls before him, by saying, when I was a journalist, I loved Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr.'s assertion that the Constitution and the First Amendment are not just about protecting, quote, free thought for those who agree with us, but freedom for the thought that we hate, end quote. But as a government official traveling around the world championing the virtues of free speech, I came to see how our First Amendment standard is an outlier. Indeed it is. Indeed, our First Amendment is an outlier in many countries, both democracies and autocracies around the world. Even the most sophisticated Arab diplomats, yes, we all know our sophisticated Arab friends, the oil diplomacy that they leverage, that even the most sophisticated Arab diplomats that I dealt with did not understand why the First Amendment allows someone to burn a Quran. Why, they asked me, would you ever want to protect that? Well, because it's an object that means different things to different people. We can deal with this thought experiment for a second. Let's say I wrote a book called Why Vaccines Give Your Children Autism. Now, you might think this is a fictitious book, and you might think I'm proselytizing people into believing, at worst, bad practices that could lead to death of humans. But I have my book, Vaccines Cause Autism, and I'm publishing it, I'm gaining a following, and then somebody burns my book. And this outrages the people that are anti-vaccine. And they go, oh, how dare you burn this book? You offend my ideology of being anti-vaxxer. Well, I think you could argue that person has a right to burn my book. In fact, some of you may feel it would even be good to have that book burned because you'd stop misinformation from spreading. The Quran, well, it is also a book of beliefs. Some people believe and some people don't. Not so different from my vaccine book that I've been publishing and collecting those royalty checks from. But back to Richard's post. It's a fair question, he writes. Yes, the First Amendment protects the thought that we hate, but it should not protect hate speech that can cause violence by one group against another. In an age when everyone has a megaphone, that seems like a design flaw. Does it? It is important to remember that our First Amendment doesn't just protect the good guys. Our foremost liberty also protects any bad actors who hide behind it to weaken our society. Yes, that is the curse of freedom. That's when you give humans freedom, they often don't act or do as you might like. But that is your problem, not theirs. It's something in the human condition to want freedom for ourselves, but not for other people, because they might not live their lives in the way that we would like them to. Nonetheless, let's get back to the article. I keep digressing. In the weeks leading up to the 2016 election, Russia's Internet Research Agency planted false stories hoping they would go viral. They did. Russian agents assumed fake identities, promulgated false narratives, and spread lies on Twitter and Facebook, all protected by the First Amendment. Okay, yes, factual statement. The Russians understood that our free press and its reflex towards balance and fairness would enable Moscow to slip its destructive ideas into our media ecosystem. Alright, let's stop there. Russia understood that our free press and its reflex towards balance and fairness? No, it's a reflex towards laziness and sensationalism. The press is biased, but it is biased towards laziness and sensationalism. Clicks and what is the minimum amount of work I, as a journalist, have to put in to get you to read this. And you know what gets clicks and is easy for journalists to write up? Sensational headlines, outrageous claims. People also like reading that stuff. A reflex towards fair and balance would enable Moscow to slip its destructive ideas into our media ecosystem. When Putin said back in 2014 that there were no Russian troops in Crimea, an outright lie, he knew our media would report it, and we did. Okay, yes. Well, you could argue that the reporter asked Putin, the president of Russia, are there troops in Crimea? If the president says no, you can still report that the president says no, which is true. That is a true reporting of the events that occurred. Putin, are there troops in Russia? No, there's not yet. Putin says there's no troops in Russia. I mean, then you can also put underneath, you can fact check it. You can go in there and be like, well, these look like Russian troops to me. These look like Russian missiles. But let's keep reading Richard's excellent modern day Iliad here. That's partly because the intellectual underpinning of the First Amendment was engineered for a simpler era. Yes, those simpletons. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton. What a bunch of country bumpkins they all were. The amendments rest on the notion that the truth will win out in what the Supreme Court Justice William O. Douglas called, quote, the marketplace of ideas. Yes. This, quote, marketplace model has a long history going back to the 17th century English intellectual John Milton. That is true. I think a more accurate historical figure to reference in terms of talking about the marketplace of ideas, though, would surely be John Stuart Mill. His book on liberty was perhaps the most famous book in advocating and defending this marketplace of ideas line of thinking, or protecting this marketplace of ideas. I don't know why he's calling him John Milton. And now let me quote you Thomas More in Utopia, because I sound sophisticated and pretentious. Yeah, Andrew Yang, UBI. Thomas More wrote about that in Utopia. Did you know that? Fun fact. Oh, wow, you're so smart. You're so well read. Shut up, you Googled that. All right, back to the article. But in all that time, no one ever quite explained how good ideas drive out bad ones, how truth triumphs over falsehood. Sometimes it doesn't. The human mind is not predisposed to believing truths over facts or over fiction. There's nothing in our DNA that is programming us to always pick capital T truth over fiction. In fact, I may be crossing a line here, but this might be why people continue to read the Quran. And maybe why they should have the right to read the Quran. I defend anybody's right to read the Quran. I'm pro First Amendment. I don't mind if facts don't triumph over fictions. I'm just playing. It's just a little intellectual game. Bible, Scientology's book, L. Ron Hubbard. They're all, read what you want, believe what you want. Let's get back to what Richard wrote, though. Milton, an early opponent of censorship, said truth would prevail in a, quote, free and open encounter. A century later, the framers believed that this marketplace was necessary for people to make informed choices in a democracy. Somehow, magically, truth would emerge. The presumption has always been that the marketplace would offer a level playing field. But in the age of social media, that landscape is neither level nor fair. Okay, well, first off, publishing the written word has never been level or fair. It's always been in the hands for most of human history and civilization, in either the hands of Egyptian scribes or rich Chinese officials, or people that owned printing presses, at which point even then it was tightly controlled by the church and the state, which is why, for instance, it was such a big deal to translate the Bible out of Latin. There's never been a level nor fair playing field. In fact, social media has done more to democratize with a capital D, the landscape for the marketplace of ideas. Never before in the history of humankind has an individual, myself or you or our friends, been able to hear from more voices, both uneducated and educated, and then make up our minds. Perhaps Richard and I disagree on this point. On the internet, truth is not optimized. No, it's not the internet that truth is not optimized. In the human mind, truth is not optimized. The human mind is optimized to survive, and believing certain ideas, whether they are right or wrong, helps us procreate or continue living. We will believe them. Truth has nothing to do with it. Truth is a higher plane of thinking. It is sometimes a luxury of the first world. On the web, getting back to the article, too many tangents. On the web, it's not enough to battle falsehood with truth. The truth doesn't always win. Yeah. In the age of social media, the marketplace model doesn't work. Did it ever work? We're harkening back to some halcyon day here. A 2016 Stanford study showed that 82% of middle schoolers couldn't distinguish between an ad labeled sponsored content and an actual news story. Only a quarter of high school students could tell the difference between an actual verified news site and one from a deceptive account designed to look like a real one. So what? We should base our new hate speech laws around the idea that a bunch of 15-year-olds can't distinguish between branded content and real reporting? Because they're 15. Maybe when they're 30. You shouldn't base your entire society around what a 15-year-old can comprehend. Perhaps that's just me. Although I would wager a guess that adults would do no better. In fact, if we use your thesis, Richard, as our data set, as our base rate data set, which is that the Russians manipulated Facebook and Instagram with fake, false narratives, and this changed the course of the US presidential election, well, who fell for that nonsense? Adults. It's not the 15-year-olds that are voting. It was the adults that fell for all the untruths and falsehoods. So your data set, by arguing that the American public was too stupid to recognize they were getting fooled by Russian agents and thus voted for Donald Trump, what are you quoting about high school and middle school students? Your thesis is a data set itself, if you want to go by that. Anyway, since World War II, many nations have passed laws to curb the incitement of racial and religious hatred. These laws started out as protections against the kinds of anti-Semitic bigotry that gave rise to the Holocaust. We call them hate speech laws, but there's no agreed-upon definition of what hate speech actually is. Yes, it's a funny thing. It's hard to reach a consensus on being offended. Because usually what offends me doesn't necessarily offend your sister, your father, your friend. In fact, many a relationship has been ruined by jokes that offend one party and don't offend the other. And to agree on some sort of unified definition of what hate speech would be would have to be a majority. But then you get into the philosophical quandary of the tyranny of the majority, in which case, just because 51% of the people agree that this is offensive, does that mean they have the right to oppress the speech of the other 49%? Something to think about. In general, hate speech is speech that attacks and insults people on the basis of race, religion, ethnic origin, and sexual orientation. Yes, basically ad hominem attacks. I think it's time to consider these statutes. The modern standard of dangerous speech comes from the Brandenburg v. Ohio and holds that speech that directly incites, quote, imminent lawless action, or is likely to do so, can be restricted. Domestic terrorists such as Dylan Roof and Omar Mateen and the El Paso shooter were consumers of hate speech. But I can see the connective tissue because it inspired them to take lawless action. Imminent would be the conditional word there. Some of this was planned out, of course. But I'll buy the premise for a moment. Speech doesn't pull the trigger, but does anyone seriously doubt that such hateful speech creates a climate where such acts are more likely? No, causation does not equal correlation. And that, I think, if we were to look into the reading habits of Mr. Roof and Omar Mateen and all these various sadistic, sociopathic killers, you would find that they consumed a variety of media. And that when they went to go watch Late Night with Jimmy Fallon, how do we separate that out from perhaps other content that we might find more disgusting or disagreeable? But how is it our right to judge that this type of content was what radicalized them and not another? I'm not saying some metrics cannot be used to define what could be radicalizing content or content that would lead somebody towards a certain set of beliefs versus others. But to prove that connective leap, you're left with the same problem as proving the evolutionary leap between inorganic and organic objects. Nonetheless, let's continue. Let the debate begin. Hate speech has a less violent but nearly as damaging impact in another way. It diminishes tolerance. It enables discrimination. Isn't that by definition speech that undermines the values that the First Amendment was designed to protect? Yes, but by regulating what people can or cannot say, are you not diminishing your tolerance for a marketplace of ideas? Is it not true that by legislating away speech that you find hateful or offensive, that you are becoming intolerant yourself? All speech is not equal. True, I agree. And where truth cannot drive out lies, we must add new guardrails. I'm all for protecting, quote, thought that we hate, but not speech that incites hate. Yes, but how do we define that? It undermines the very values of a fair marketplace of ideas. Note the conceit there? Fair marketplace of ideas. What is fair? Define for me, Richard, what is fair? Anyway, he goes on to say, it undermines the very values of a fair marketplace of ideas that the First Amendment is designed to protect. It's designed to protect an open marketplace of ideas, not a fair marketplace of ideas. Life isn't fair, and even then we all have a different definition of fair. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that AirPod review. I found it, just a pleasure with the new haptic feedback. Amazing. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you tomorrow. Click like, subscribe if you found this interesting. Bye.